The first sign that something was wrong in my marriage didn't come with a loud bang or an explosive argument. There were no screaming matches or tearful admissions. Instead, it slipped in quietly, almost unnoticed, like a shadow that stretches just a little longer each day. It began with a new scent in the house, one I didn't recognize. I can still picture the exact moment it hit me. I stepped through the door that evening, and there it was, an unfamiliar perfume lingering in the air. It wasn't Lillian's usual fragrance. For as long as I could remember, she'd worn the same gentle, floral scent. But this one was entirely different, intense, assertive, the kind of perfume that turned heads. And it unnerved me. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she'd simply decided to try something new. Or maybe someone else's perfume had transferred to her during the day. That kind of thing happens, right? People change, they experiment with new things. But soon, it became impossible to ignore the other changes. She started heading out earlier each morning, yet her return grew increasingly delayed. Her phone, once casually left around the house, was now always flipped screen down. When she laughed at her messages, the smile never extended to me and the jokes were never shared. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but doubt is sneaky. It doesn't announce itself. It quietly settles in and takes over. That night, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen. The lights were dim, my dinner untouched and cooling rapidly in front of me. She was late again. I kept telling myself not to look at the clock, but I couldn't help it. I checked it over and over until finally, at exactly 10:42 in the evening, my phone buzzed with a message. "Hey, I'm staying at Jenna's tonight. Don't wait up." I read those words again and again, feeling something knot deep in my stomach. Lillian didn't have a friend named Jenna. I set the phone down with deliberate slowness, staring at it like it might offer more information if I just looked long enough. My heartbeat remained steady, oddly calm, yet a strange emptiness opened inside me. This was the moment I realized, the point where everything tilted. But I didn't respond. I didn't call her, didn't send a message, didn't confront her with demands or accusations. I just stood, reached for my jacket, and walked out. I wasn't going to chase her. I didn't need to uncover more evidence. The truth was already plain. I walked away not because I was giving up, but because I had finally accepted it. There was no need to hear more excuses. I already knew everything I needed to know. I wish I could say I was devastated, that my heart sank and my knees buckled as I clung to the counter. But that wasn't the case. There was no drama, no breakdown. Just stillness. A strange, numb quiet settled over me as I looked at that message, as though it were a simple reminder to take out the trash or pay a bill. Perhaps I had known all along. The signs were there, small, consistent changes I had dismissed as stress or routine. But this wasn't subtle. This was her lying to my face and not even trying hard to make it believable. She hadn't even bothered to pick a real name. There was no Jenna. That was what stung the most. Not the lie itself, but the laziness of it. Like she assumed I wouldn't question it. As if she already knew I wouldn't. The kitchen looked untouched, exactly as it had that morning. The coffee cup, half full, still sat on the counter. The stack of mail remained unopened. The faint aroma of the cinnamon candle she adored still lingered in the air. It felt like walking into a moment preserved in time, but one I no longer belonged to. I should have felt rage. I should have picked up the phone and demanded to know where she really was. I should have wanted answers. But something in me had shifted, and I didn't feel like myself anymore. Instead, I walked out the door. Outside, the night air felt sharp and cool as it wrapped around me. I had no destination, no plan in mind. I just started walking, my hands deep in my pockets, my breath visible in the crisp air. The streets were nearly silent, save for the soft hum of distant traffic. The world kept turning, oblivious to the quiet end of my marriage. I passed familiar places, each one tied to a memory with Lillian. The cozy coffee shop we frequented on lazy Sunday mornings. The quaint bookstore where she could spend entire afternoons. The charming Italian restaurant where I had asked her to marry me. These places were still there, unchanged, yet they felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else's life. Before I realized where I was headed, I found myself standing outside a bar. Not the usual spot I'd visit. This one was tucked between buildings, low-lit and almost hidden from view. A flickering neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a muted glow on the sidewalk. I paused for a moment, then stepped inside. The interior was quiet, just a handful of patrons quietly nursing their drinks. No music played, only the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses. I made my way to the bar and took a seat. With a nod to the bartender, I ordered a whiskey. My voice didn't tremble. Within moments, the drink was in front of me. I wrapped my fingers around the glass and watched how the amber liquid caught the dim light. I wasn't much of a drinker. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't the same man who had kissed his wife goodbye that morning. Tonight I was someone else entirely. Someone who didn't need to scream or plead. Someone who had stopped expecting answers he already knew he wouldn't get. I brought the glass to my lips and took a slow, measured sip. Without a second thought, I released the grip on the life I once believed was mine. The whiskey stung on the way down, but I embraced the burn. Its warmth spread across my chest and burrowed into my bones, grounding me in a moment that felt more real than anything else around me. Everything I had known, my marriage, the house we made a home, all the years invested in a life with Lillian, seemed distant now, like remnants of a dream I had overslept through and lost the meaning of. Behind the counter, the bartender, a man with the weary eyes of someone who had seen countless hearts unravel over drinks, tilted his head slightly toward me. "Tough night?" he asked, his tone lacking judgment. I exhaled, a sound that barely passed for a laugh. "Something like that," I murmured. He gave a knowing nod as if he grasped more than I had said and turned back to polishing the counter. I respected that, no sympathy, no probing questions, just quiet understanding. I studied the man reflected back at me in the bar's mirror. The face was familiar, my own, but something about it felt unfamiliar. The features hadn't changed, but the expression had. There was no visible anger or pain, just an overwhelming emptiness. Around me, the gentle hum of voices blended with the clink of glassware, fragments of conversations drifting through the air. Life carried on, but I was no longer part of it. Toward the far end of the bar, a couple sat closely, their world narrowed to each other. A man in a rumpled suit stared blankly at his phone, looking as though sleep had eluded him for days. A woman stirred her drink slowly, her eyes glazed with memories. Each of us had our own reasons for being here, yet we shared a silent bond, an unspoken desire for escape, a brief reprieve from reality. I took another sip from my glass, this one slower, more deliberate. There was no urgency to forget or drown anything. I was just there. Just existing. Then, without warning, a thought pierced through. What was she doing right now? Was she with him, laughing, whispering in his ear the way she used to with me? Did I even cross her mind anymore? My fingers tightened around the glass. I wasn't naive. I'd learned enough to understand that people evolve and love doesn't always anchor them together. But this wasn't evolution. This was betrayal. She had looked me in the eye each morning, kissed me goodbye like everything was fine, all while keeping secrets behind my back. She had chosen to pretend I didn't matter. I let the breath escape from my nose, pushing the bitterness away. None of it mattered now. Her path was clear, and for the first time in ages, so was mine. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't going to chase the pieces of something already shattered. I was finished. Silently, I slid my empty glass toward the bartender and gave him a small nod. "Another," I said. The next drink tasted different. It wasn't about forgetting anymore. It felt more like a quiet tribute to what once was, a final salute to the person I used to be. And for a brief moment, there was a sense of calm. I don't recall leaving the bar, but I do remember the cold that greeted me. It wrapped around me like a second skin, that unmistakable chill of late night settling into the quiet streets. The city had wound down, restaurants dimming, sirens wailing faintly from afar, random bursts of laughter echoing through the empty spaces. Everything looked the same, perfectly normal even though my world had unraveled only hours ago. I walked. I didn't have a destination. I just moved forward, letting the streets stretch out like a path to nowhere. I told myself I wasn't thinking about Lillian, that I wasn't concerned with where she was or who she might be with. But each step reminded me of the emptiness, the silent reality that I had just walked away from a life I'd spent years building. Eventually, I ended up in front of a 24-hour diner, the kind with buzzing neon signs and a permanent aroma of stale coffee. I'd been here before. A long time ago. Back when Lillian and I were young, broke, and happy. We used to sit in a booth at 2 in the morning, laughing over cheap pancakes, back when forever felt like a promise we could actually keep. The bell above the door rang as I stepped inside. The place was nearly deserted. An elderly man nursed a mug of coffee in one corner, and a waitress stood behind the counter, her posture suggesting she'd worked one too many graveyard shifts. She barely acknowledged me as I slid into a booth by the window. The menu lay open in front of me, but I couldn't focus on the words. My head was clouded. Not from the alcohol, but from the emotional weight I hadn't yet fully unpacked. This was real. I wasn't going home to Lillian tonight. I might never again. "Can I get you something, Han?" The waitress had approached, her notepad ready. She looked to be in her late 50s, her face marked by time and tiredness. But her expression carried a quiet kindness. She'd likely served countless men like me. Silent, confused, trying to retrace the steps that had led them here. Coffee, I replied after a pause. Black. She gave a slight nod, scribbling it down as if I'd ordered something far more complicated. Tough night? She asked. I let out a breath, half a laugh, caught between exhaustion and resignation. You could probably say that was true. She didn't dig for more information, just handed me the coffee and walked off, leaving me in silence with nothing but my own thoughts. I cupped my hands around the warm mug, letting the heat ease into my fingers. For what felt like an eternity, I simply sat there, staring at the wisps of steam curling up from the coffee, the gentle hum of the diner quietly filling the space. In my mind, I could hear Lillian's voice, light and teasing, saying something like, "You always drink coffee too late. You'll never fall asleep afterward." It struck me how the things you long for the most aren't always the monumental memories, but the small, ordinary pieces, the random comments, the private jokes, the simple rituals you didn't know were meaningful until they were gone. I didn't check my phone. I had no desire to see if she had sent a message. I didn't want to read some lazy excuse, or worse, see no message at all. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Hidden behind a few crumpled dollar bills and an old receipt was a tiny, folded piece of paper. It had been with me for years, edges frayed from time, something I carried unconsciously. I unfolded it slowly, revealing her handwriting. No matter what, I choose you. It had once been a vow. Now it felt more like a ghost from another lifetime, a memory soaked in false hope. I stared at the sentence for a while before folding it again and placing it beside my coffee on the table. Without hesitation, I slid out from the booth, walked up to the counter, and left it there next to the tip. Some things I realized were no longer worth holding on to. Outside, the night had slipped into that surreal stretch where time seemed to pause. The city, once vibrant just hours earlier, now lay in a strange hush. Empty streets stretched out before me, disturbed only by the occasional car passing through the stillness. The bitter flavor of the coffee still clung to my tongue, grounding me in the moment, though it did little to lift the haze clouding my thoughts. I had no clear direction, no end goal, only a feeling that I couldn't return to where I'd come from. Not yet, maybe not ever. Nights like this have a way of forcing you to confront yourself in unexpected ways. As I walked, my reflection flickered in the darkened windows of closed stores. I looked like the same man, but deep down I wasn't. Something had shifted. An invisible change you can't describe but can feel settle in your bones. I wasn't the same person who had woken that morning, kissed his wife goodbye, and moved through the day pretending everything was fine. Because nothing was fine. That truth struck again, heavy and unrelenting. Where was she now? Was she curled beside him, whispering those same little phrases she used to share with me, laughing at the jokes I once told her? I shook my head and forced the thoughts away. They no longer held weight, or at least they shouldn't. Eventually, I found myself at the edge of a small park. It was completely empty. One of the swings creaked softly in the breeze, the streetlights casting stretched, weary shadows across the pavement. Without really deciding, I wandered over to a bench and sat down. It had been years since I sat alone on a park bench at night, doing absolutely nothing. I leaned back and exhaled deeply, watching as a single leaf danced along the ground, carried by the wind. The world seemed paused, as though it was waiting for something unseen to unfold. Then my phone vibrated. For hours I had avoided it, unwilling to face whatever half-truth or painful confession might be waiting for me. But there, in that quiet stillness, I felt compelled to check it. One new message. I stared at the screen for a beat before opening it. Lillian, I know you're upset, but please just come home. Those two words, come home, once would have filled me with comfort. Now they echoed hollow. I didn't respond. I just sat there, letting the weight of everything press down on me. The truth was, I had no idea where home even was anymore, because it certainly wasn't in the place where she had decided I wasn't enough. For the first time in what felt like forever, I understood something. I had nowhere I needed to be, and strangely that realization felt more like a release than a threat. I couldn't say how long I sat there, phone still in my hand, eyes locked on those words. They were soft, simple, come home. Yet there was no apology, no explanation, just an expectation like I would automatically return and pretend nothing had happened. I imagined her waiting in the house. Not our house anymore, but mine. Maybe curled up on the couch we chose together, expecting me to walk in like everything was normal. I could picture her giving that practiced look of concern she used whenever she needed to manipulate a moment. Or maybe she wouldn't even glance up from her phone, assuming I would, as always, fall back into place. The thought twisted my stomach. I had once believed that real love meant patience. That when you truly cared for someone, you forgave, you put in the effort, you stayed and fought for it. But what do you do when they don't fight back? What if they had already made their decision long before you even knew there was a war to fight? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have asked her why. I could have faced her, demanded honesty, forced her to confirm the truths I already knew deep down. But what would be the point of that? Just to give her another opportunity to lie, to pretend one last time? I was done participating in the illusion. I powered off my phone and slid it back into my pocket. The park was calm, a gentle breeze brushing against my skin. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, eyes locked on the pavement. For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no expectations, no obligations, nowhere I needed to be. Nobody waiting for me or counting on me. And that emptiness, it unsettled me in a way nothing else ever had. My whole world had been constructed around the idea of being someone's partner. Around the rhythm of shared routines, anniversaries remembered, quiet in jokes, and early Sunday coffee runs. My identity was wrapped up in knowing that at the end of the day, there was someone waiting at home, someone who belonged to me. Now, that certainty had vanished. I was just a lone man sitting on a bench in an empty park, pockets full of unread messages and a heart that felt scraped raw and hollow. With a sudden impulse, I rose to my feet and shoved my hands deep into my jacket. I needed to move, to find a direction, any direction. But where would I even go? Back to that dim bar? A sleepless night in a late-night diner? Some budget motel just to avoid dozing off in the front seat of my car like a sad movie cliché? None of that felt right. I craved something genuine, something that wasn't just another attempt at pretending I was okay. So without consciously deciding, I began walking. The streets stretched out in quiet stillness, only the occasional flicker from a faulty streetlight breaking the darkness. I didn't have a clear destination, but my steps seemed guided by something deeper. Before long, I found myself standing in front of the old bridge, our bridge. I hadn't realized until that moment where my feet had been leading me all along. We used to come here late at night, when the noise of the world grew too loud or when life got overwhelming. It had always been our escape. We'd sit on the edge, legs hanging over the water, watching city lights ripple across the river's surface. I looked at the exact spot we used to sit. It was strange how places could cling to memories even after the people were long gone. I leaned against the railing, watching the dark water below. The city's reflection shimmered, always moving, never settling, just like how I felt inside, fragmented, distorted, at odds with peace. My hand instinctively went into my pocket, brushing against something small and well-worn. It was that familiar folded piece of paper. Those words etched into it, "No matter what, I choose you." A soft, almost ironic chuckle slipped out. I pulled it out and unfolded it once more. The ink had faded, the paper edges frayed, a fragile remnant of a different life. A vow that had once meant everything, and now stood for nothing at all. Without pausing, I released it. The wind snatched it from my fingers, lifting it over the railing. I watched as it floated downward, spinning and twisting, swallowed by the vast night below. In that moment, I let go of her too. Turning from the bridge, I walked away. My steps were lighter than they'd been in weeks. I still didn't have a destination in mind, but for once, it didn't matter. I kept walking. There's something different about the rhythm of a city at night, something you only notice when you're truly alone. The silence isn't complete. It's filled with the low hum of distant streetlights, the occasional sharp note of a rogue car horn, and the faint echo of your own footsteps on the cracked concrete. The night doesn't feel lonely, it just feels detached. The world kept spinning, indifferent to the way my life had unraveled just hours ago. I passed familiar landmarks. The tiny record store where Lillian and I once spent an entire afternoon in a passionate debate over which album to buy. The cozy bookstore where she used to vanish among the shelves, fingers gliding across the spines like greeting old companions. And that little bakery with coffee so terrible we used to laugh about it, but those cinnamon rolls, she adored them. Everything was still there. Unchanged. The only thing missing now is us. Eventually, I stopped outside a 24-hour convenience store. The fluorescent lighting flickered above the entrance, casting sharp shadows on the pavement. I wasn't hungry, but I stepped inside anyway. The place smelled like stale chips and disinfectant. The clerk barely acknowledged me, too absorbed in a game playing quietly from his phone's speaker. The aisles were empty. Shelves crammed with things I didn't need. I wandered aimlessly, picking up a pack of gum only to set it down again. My fingers slid across the cool drinks in the fridge, past neatly lined snacks and aging magazines no one had touched in years. I hadn't come for food. I wasn't even sure why I was there. Then I noticed it, a cheap, disposable camera dangling from a hook near the register. I froze. It was one of those old-school types no one used anymore, the kind you had to get developed just to see what you'd captured. You never really knew what the pictures looked like until much later. The kind of camera we used to bring on road trips, the ones we'd use to snap shaky photos of fading sunsets and roadside gas stations, laughing when most of them turned out blurry and unusable. That's the kind I found myself reaching for. Before I could second-guess it, I grabbed it. The store clerk scanned it without a word, his eyes glued to a glowing screen, indifferent. Moments later, I stepped back onto the sidewalk, a plastic bag in hand, the only thing inside being that little camera. It felt ridiculous. Meaningless. But somehow it was the first choice I had made all night that truly belonged to me. I wandered for another hour, moving down unfamiliar streets, letting the city carry me along like a gentle stream. At some point, I took the camera from the bag, wound the film until it clicked, a sound that felt oddly comforting, then held it up to my face. My first shot captured a vacant road stretched ahead, lit by the distant glow of a traffic signal, the pavement vanishing into the shadows. I didn't understand why, but it felt like it mattered. The next photo was of an old mural fading into the side of a building, partially overtaken by graffiti, something both broken and beautiful. Then I caught sight of a stray cat perched on the hood of an abandoned vehicle, its gaze cautious but steady. I snapped a picture. And I kept going, taking more photographs. Nothing monumental. Nothing dramatic. Just the little things that were real, things that had nothing to do with her. By the time I reached the city's outskirts, the film was nearly used up. I found a gas station nearby and paid for a cheap motel room. Inside, I tossed my phone onto the bed without checking it. I didn't want to see her name pop up or read whatever excuse she might have typed. Instead, I sat near a narrow window watching cars drift by on the highway, their hum soft and distant. I wound the camera for one final shot. Then, without thinking, I aimed it at myself. A click. A flash. A frozen moment in time, not for her, not to share, just for me. Morning arrived without noise. I thought I'd wake to a flood of emotions, resentment, pain, the emptiness that comes after something long-standing crumbles. But all I felt was a quiet stillness. It wasn't quite peace, but it was close. The air in the room carried a faint scent of cleaning supplies and old fabric. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, painting long streaks of gold across the bedspread. I sat up slowly, rubbing my hands over my face, and for the first time in ages it hit me, I wasn't thinking about her. Lillian had been tangled into nearly every corner of my life, my choices, my routines. But at that moment she didn't dominate my thoughts. And that realization meant something. I stood, stretching out the soreness from walking all night. My phone remained on the nightstand, screen down, untouched. I knew there were probably messages, maybe even missed calls. But I didn't care to check. Instead, I reached for the camera again. I turned it over in my hands, the weight of the night resting quietly inside it. These weren't memories tied to heartbreak or sorrow. They weren't about her. They belonged to me. A record of a night when I had no choice but to release the past and keep moving, even without a map. I grabbed my jacket, packed up, and stepped outside. The early morning air was crisp, the kind that feels clean and honest. Around me, the city was starting to wake. Cafes unbolting their doors, food carts rolling into place, people beginning their routines. For once, I wasn't frozen in place. I wasn't waiting for anyone or anything. I passed by a small pharmacy and dropped off the camera at the counter. The woman behind the register glanced at it, then at me, raising a brow as she slid it into a processing bag. Kind of retro, huh? She said with a small, amused smile. I smiled back. Yeah, but sometimes the old ways still work best. She handed me a receipt. They'll be ready in a couple of days. I nodded my thanks and stepped outside once more. For so long, everything I did was built around Lillian. Our shared plans, our intertwined paths, our future. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't living for a we. I was living for myself. And that no longer frightened me. I had no set path ahead. Maybe I'd hit the road and just drive, no destination in mind, letting the journey decide for me. Or maybe I'd head toward the coast, find some quiet beach where the ocean could wash away the old echoes. Or perhaps I'd stay right here for a while and let life show me what came next, without rushing, without forcing it. Whatever I chose, it would be mine. I drew in a deep breath, the morning air filling my lungs, fresh and light. And as I began walking, leaving the past where it belonged, I held on to one truth above all. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something new.